The crystal chandeliers of the Vance estate shimmered like frozen stars, casting their glow across the polished mahogany table. At 28, I should have felt proud sitting there, proof of everything I had built without help. Instead, I felt like prey, waiting to be cornered. My mother, Vivian, leaned forward with her trademark elegance, topping off her Bordeaux as though this evening was nothing more than a social ritual. Beside her, my father, Charles Vance, slid a thick ivory envelope across the table. His movements were smooth, deliberate, the way he'd close a business deal. "Clara," he said, his voice syrupy with control, "this isn't just about you, it's about the security of all of us." I kept my hands folded in my lap, the envelope sitting between us like a loaded weapon. Vivian's smile widened, sweet as poisoned honey. "It's only a formality. One family, one future." I opened the envelope slowly. The papers inside crackled as I pulled them free. The words swam for a moment before sharpening into focus. Every property deed, every account, every investment I had fought for was to be placed into a family trust. A trust, of course, controlled solely by them. Charles nudged a Mont Blanc pen toward me. "This way, there are no silos, no risks. We move forward together." Inside, my chest tightened like a spring. Outwardly, I smiled. "You've certainly been thorough." For a moment, I caught it, an unmistakable flicker of triumph in their eyes. They expected me to fold. They believed duty, guilt, or both would bind me. They had no idea how far I had come. Before I could respond, a knock echoed against the tall dining room doors. The butler stepped in, his voice measured but tense. "Ma'am, your guest has arrived." Vivian's glass paused mid-air, surprise flashing in her eyes. "Guest?" The sound of heels clicking against the marble floor cut through the silence. Sophia Grant, my attorney, entered with the calm presence of a woman who had dismantled far larger empires than the Vance family facade. Her tailored suit was midnight black, her leather briefcase balanced on one hand. "Good evening," Sophia said, setting the case on the table without waiting for permission. "I understand there's a contract my client is being asked to sign." The color drained slightly from Vivian's cheeks. "This is a private family matter," she snapped. "There's no need for lawyers here." Sophia ignored her and flipped through the pages I'd just been handed. With each turn, her brows lifted higher. Finally, she let out a quiet, incredulous laugh. "Remarkable. This isn't a trust. It's a full transfer of authority. If Clara signs this, she forfeits every right to her own assets. Every dollar. Every brick." The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. My father recovered first. His jaw flexed, though his tone remained smooth. "It's about trust, Ms. Grant, about protecting our family from financial risk." "Interesting," Sophia replied, closing the folder with a snap. "Because what I see is coercion disguised as legacy. If this is truly about trust, why is Clara the only one giving up anything?" Vivian leaned forward, voice syrupy again. "Darling, you know us. We would never hurt you. This is simply a safeguard." I leaned back, folding my hands over the envelope as if sealing it shut. "We're finished here tonight." For the first time, fear flickered across their carefully constructed masks. Vivian's fingers tightened around her wineglass. Charles's eyes hardened like glass about to shatter. But he wasn't ready to let go. His voice cut across the table, sharp and commanding. "Sit down, Clara. You don't understand what's at stake." Vivian reached toward the untouched glass of wine before me, her tone softer, almost coaxing. "There's something you need to hear first. Something that changes everything." Against my better judgment, I remained seated. Sophia stepped behind my chair, her presence solid, grounding me against the storm about to break. Charles steepled his fingers and leaned in, his gaze fixed on me with unnerving intensity. "The Newport estate," he said. "After years of probate, it's nearly ours again, worth more than you can imagine. And as our daughter, you stand to benefit as much as we do. But unity is essential. Judges despise fractured families. If we appear divided, If you appear divided, we risk losing everything. The implication landed with chilling clarity. Sign or be erased from their future. I let their words drip into the silence, sweet on the surface, poisonous beneath. They thought the Newport estate was the bait that would reel me back in. What they didn't know was that I already saw it for what it was. A leash. The Newport estate dangled before me like a poisoned apple, but as my father's voice droned on, my mind pulled me back to the years that had carried me to this very table. Years of sweat, grit, and quiet defiance. Years they had never witnessed. When I was 22, Seattle was in the middle of a transformation. Whole neighborhoods shifted overnight as tech money poured in, displacing old homes and old families. My friends spent their weekends at rooftop bars, laughing under neon lights. I spent mine crouched on the floors of forgotten kitchens, stripping tiles until my hands blistered and bled. The first house I bought was a wreck, peeling wallpaper, mold creeping across the ceiling, pipes so old they groaned like an animal in pain. I lived in it while I worked, sleeping in a drafty corner with nothing but a space heater and a blanket from Goodwill. Some nights, rats scratched in the walls. Others, the roof leaked so badly I placed buckets around me like an odd orchestra of dripping notes. But each morning, I woke up with a single thought. This will not break me. I poured every dime I had into that house. When I sold it, I didn't celebrate with champagne. I took the modest profit and used it as a down payment for the next one, and then the next. By the time I was 25, I held the keys to a Craftsman duplex. I can still remember the weight of them in my hand, proof that discipline mattered more than pedigree. When I showed my parents, hoping for even the smallest flicker of pride, I was met with dismissal. Vivian arched a brow and murmured, "You were lucky the market turned." Charles added, "Without us you wouldn't last a year." Their words stung like salt on fresh wounds, but they only fueled me. I doubled my efforts, reinvested every dollar, and refused to borrow a cent from them. By 27, I owned 5 properties and managed a portfolio worth more than either of them realized. Yet, their interference was always lurking at the edges. I remember one afternoon, coming home earlier than expected from a showing. The air inside my apartment was different. Disturbed, unsettled. My stomach dropped when I found Charles standing in my living room. The locks were new, the lease signed by me alone. Yet there he was, flipping through the drawer where I kept property deeds and bank statements. He looked up, startled for a second, then covered it with a stiff smile. "Just curious," he said, as if curiosity gave him rights to my life. I laughed it off at the time, telling myself he was old-fashioned, raised in an era where a father felt entitled to his daughter's affairs. But deep down, unease coiled tight. And it wasn't the first boundary they'd crossed. Years earlier, when I begged them to co-sign my student loans, they refused. "It will teach you responsibility," Vivian said with a dismissive wave. Responsibility came in the form of double shifts, skipped meals, and nights in a basement apartment where mold grew faster than I could clean it. They told themselves it was tough love. I see it now for what it was, calculated neglect. Still, I endured. I negotiated with contractors who tried to patronize me, stood firm with buyers who thought I'd fold, and studied markets until I could smell a downturn before it hit. Each decision, each victory, each failure, mine alone. So now, as I sat at their gleaming table, their contract heavy in my hands, I realized something with startling clarity. Their neglect had forged the independence they despised, and that independence was exactly what they were trying to strip from me tonight. Vivian had been testing the waters for years. Over coffee once, she leaned in and said, "Family should merge finances, Clara. What's the point of keeping things separate if we're all working toward the same future?" She said it casually, but her eyes watched me like a hawk. Charles's weapon was guilt. "We've sacrificed for you. Don't we deserve to feel secure?" he once asked, as though my survival was a debt I could never repay. Back then, I brushed their words aside, telling myself it was their way of holding on. But now, looking across the table, I saw their manipulation for what it truly was. These weren't harmless suggestions. They were rehearsals, conditioning me to normalize intrusion so I might accept exploitation later. My gaze drifted to the untouched contract. Every page reeked of entitlement disguised as love. Every clause screamed control. And suddenly, I understood. This dinner wasn't about family unity. It was the final move in a game they had been playing all my life. And for the first time, I had no intention of playing along. Vivian's voice softened, each word dripping with honey meant to disguise the venom. Clara, the Newport estate is not just a house, it's history. Generations of Vances have walked those halls. And soon, it will be ours again. Charles leaned in, his steepled fingers casting a sharp shadow across the contract. Probate is nearly resolved. Judges want to see stability. Families working as one. If you sign tonight, it proves our unity. It secures your place in the inheritance. My inheritance. The words twisted in my chest, sharp as broken glass. They weren't offering me a gift. They were dangling a leash. I kept my expression calm, but inside, rage pulsed with every beat of my heart. For years, they had dismissed my achievements, refused my pleas, intruded into my private life, and now, when I had built a fortune with my own blistered hands, they demanded I surrender it all in exchange for crumbs from a decaying estate. I glanced at Sophia. Her face betrayed nothing, but her eyes met mine, steady, warning. Don't take the bait. Still, I let my parents speak. Vivian painted images of grand galas at Newport, of marble floors and sea views, as if nostalgia alone could justify coercion. Charles's voice deepened, carrying the authority of a man who had bullied boardrooms for decades. Without unity, the court may question your claim. Do you want to risk being excluded entirely? The threat was clear. Sign or be erased. I folded the contract back into its envelope and slid it toward them. If the Newport estate requires this kind of sacrifice, then perhaps it's not worth having. Vivian's smile faltered, the corners of her lips trembling before she forced them back into place. Don't be naive, Clara. Without us, you'd be nothing more than a flipper of rundown houses. This is legacy. Without legacy, money means nothing. Her words struck a nerve, but not in the way she intended. Legacy. That was the mask they wore, the illusion they clung to. Yet I had seen enough cracks in that mask to know their so-called legacy was crumbling. I rose from my chair, every movement deliberate. I won't sign, not tonight, not ever. Charles's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. Be careful, Clara. Reputation is fragile. The real estate world is small. One word from us, and doors will close before you. A chill prickled down my spine. It wasn't just inheritance they were threatening to take. It was the reputation I had spent years building brick by brick. But fear no longer ruled me. I pushed my chair back from the table. Then let the doors close. I'll build my own. Sophia's presence behind me was a wall of steel. Without another glance, I turned and walked toward the tall double doors of the dining room. As they shut behind me, I caught the faint sound of Vivian's crystal glass shattering against the floor. A brittle sound, fitting for the brittle empire they were so desperate to protect. The night air outside was sharp and cold, biting my cheeks as I stepped into the driveway. I inhaled deeply, the sky above me vast and merciless. For the first time in years, I felt the true scale of what I was up against. This wasn't a family dispute, it was war. And if they wanted to turn my life into a battlefield, then I would fight on my own terms. The very next morning, I called in a favor from a woman I had met years ago during a messy property dispute. Her name was Miles Harlan, a private investigator with the sharp instincts of a wolf and a reputation for digging where others dared not. If my parents thought they could corner me with contracts and inheritance threats, then I would uncover the foundation they stood on and expose it. Miles didn't waste time. Within a week, he delivered a thick manila file to Sophia's office, his eyes glinting with the satisfaction of a hunter returning with prey. Sophia and I sat shoulder to shoulder at her mahogany desk as we opened it. What spilled across the pages made my stomach twist. The Newport estate, the shining jewel they dangled before me, wasn't a fortress of wealth at all. It was drowning. Mortgaged to the hilt. Leveraged again and again for loans they had no hope of repaying. Their supposed empire was nothing more than scaffolding built on rotting wood. But the next revelation cut deeper than numbers. Tucked into the file was a fresh loan application bearing my name. The signature at the bottom looked eerily familiar. My own, but not quite. The slant of the letters, the flourish of the C. Someone who had watched me sign hundreds of documents had tried to replicate it. My father's hand, perhaps. Or worse, my mother's. My throat tightened as I pressed a trembling finger against the page. They forged me, I whispered. Sophia's jaw clenched, her voice steady. This isn't manipulation anymore, Clara. This is fraud. Criminal. With evidence like this, we're no longer talking about family disputes. We're talking about felonies. The words echoed in my ears, but beneath the horror came a flicker of clarity. I thought of the first time they had refused me, college loans I begged for, their faces smug as they claimed it would teach me responsibility. I thought of my nights in that damp basement apartment, eating canned soup while working double shifts. I had worn those moments like badges of honor, proof that I could survive without them. But looking at the forged signature, my perspective cracked wide open. They hadn't been teaching me independence. They had been teaching themselves access, conditioning me to live without help so that when exploitation came later, I wouldn't recognize it for what it was. I set the file down and pressed my palms flat against the cool wood of Sophia's desk, steadying myself. Rage pulsed under my skin, but beneath it, grief churned like an undertow. Grief for the parents I thought I had, for the hope I once carried that maybe one day they would see me as more than a resource to be drained. Sophia leaned forward, her eyes locking onto mine. Protecting yourself is not betrayal. Betrayal already happened, to you. Don't mistake survival for selfishness. Her words landed heavy but true, sinking into me like an anchor in a storm. For the first time, the guilt that had always nipped at me began to loosen its grip. Still, a darker thought gnawed at me. If they had crossed this line, how far were they willing to go? That night, lying awake in my apartment, I let the memories roll back like film reels. The Christmas mornings where my sister was showered with gifts while I unwrapped token gestures. The college years where they paraded my cousin's accomplishments but ignored mine. Even the little heirlooms, my grandmother's locket, my grandfather's cufflinks, that vanished from the family safe with vague excuses of being appraised. All the patterns connected now, every missing piece pointing to the same truth. Their love was not protection, it was possession. And possession had finally crossed into theft. As dawn crept through my blinds, I sat upright, resolve hardening inside me. If they wanted to play a game of shadows, I would drag everything they'd hidden into the light, and I knew exactly where to start. Sophia didn't hesitate. The moment we confirmed the forgery, she called in another ally, Drayton Lee, a forensic accountant known for uncovering money trails people thought they had buried in concrete. He was quiet, unassuming, with wire-framed glasses and a voice so even it felt out of place against the storm building inside me. But his skills were lethal. Within days, he laid out the truth like an autopsy. The Vance fortune was a corpse dressed in jewels, offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, shell companies registered in Delaware with names so generic they might as well have been placeholders. Layers upon layers of debt, each loan rolled into another, buying them just enough time to parade their wealth at charity galas and sip vintage wine at country clubs. I thought the forged loan in my name would be the worst of it. I was wrong. Drayton slid a receipt across the table during our third meeting, yellowed, crinkled, and dated 7 years ago. The pawnshop address leapt off the page before I even read the item description. My grandmother's pearl locket, my grandfather's gold cufflinks, pieces of our family's history, promised to me since I was a child. gone for a few $1,000s in quick cash. I sat frozen, the room spinning. I remembered being 12, twirling the locket in my fingers as my grandmother told me it was mine when I was old enough to understand its value. I remembered my father's dismissive shrug when I asked about it years later. "It's being appraised," he'd said, his voice too casual, and like a fool, I believed him. Sophia's voice broke through my haze, steady and sharp. "This isn't just fraud anymore, this is theft. They've been cannibalizing their own legacy for years." Legacy. The word hit me like a punch. For months, they'd dressed up their demands in that very word, holding it like a torch to blind me. Yet here was the truth. The Vance legacy was nothing but smoke, stolen heirlooms, and debts hidden in offshore accounts. A laugh escaped me then, bitter, hollow. They sold our history for cash, and now they want to chain me to the ruins. Sophia leaned forward. "Then let's stop them on their own stage." It was her idea to mirror their tactics. If they wanted to manipulate me at the dinner table, then I would dismantle them at the same place. No boardrooms, no whispers in probate courts. Just their empire unraveling under the same chandeliers where they once demanded my obedience. We spent nights preparing. The three of us, Sophia, Drayton, and me, turning evidence into a weapon sharp enough to cut through decades of lies, fraudulent loan documents, receipts from pawn shops, bank statements from offshore accounts, photographs of properties slipping into foreclosure despite the family's glittering facade. The more we compiled, the less I felt like the child they had tried to control. Each page of evidence stripped another layer of guilt, until what remained was only clarity. When the file was finally thick enough to break their performance in half, I stared at it across Sophia's desk. Not with satisfaction, not with revenge, but with resolve. This wasn't about punishing them. It was about ending them, the version of them that thought control was love, that thought betrayal could be justified by blood. And I knew exactly where to deliver the blow. Back at their own dinner table. The next invitation arrived exactly as I expected. Thick cardstock, gilded edges, embossed with the Vance family crest. It was always the same, a performance of grandeur to mask desperation. They assumed I would come alone, ready to be swayed by promises of inheritance. Instead, I walked into the dining room with Sophia at my side, and under her arm, the file that would end it all. The room was staged like a theater set. Silver polished to a blinding shine, crystal glasses catching the chandelier's glow, and a centerpiece of white orchids that probably cost more than my first car. Charles rose at once, voice smooth as glass. "We trust you've reconsidered." Vivian smiled, brittle and forced, her diamonds catching the light as though even they wanted to betray her. "Please, Clara, sit. We can resolve this as a family." I sat, but I didn't touch the folder they had prepared for me. Instead, Sophia placed our file squarely in the center of the table. She opened it slowly, deliberately, as though peeling back the layers of their illusion one page at a time. "Offshore accounts," she said, her tone measured. "Forged signatures, loans in Clara's name without her knowledge. And let's not forget the pawnshop receipts for heirlooms you claimed were being appraised." Vivian's face drained of color, her hand shot across the table, trembling as she tried to close the file. "Clara, this isn't what it looks like. We did it for the family, to protect you." Charles reacted differently. His fist slammed the armrest, the silver rattling against fine china. "This is betrayal. After all we've done for you, you dare bring outsiders into our affairs?" I met his glare with steady eyes. "Family doesn't mean ownership. You've mistaken me for your lifeline. I won't be your rescue fund." For a moment the room was silent except for Vivian's stifled sobs. She looked smaller now, fragile beneath her pearls, while Charles's fury burned hotter, his face reddening as he realized control was slipping through his fingers. But neither of them had time to recover. The faint sound of sirens reached us first, growing louder as blue and red lights flickered against the tall dining room windows. My parents exchanged a look, panic for the first time breaking through their carefully crafted masks. Sophia leaned back in her chair, folding her arms. Her voice was calm, almost casual. "You should know Clara filed charges the moment we confirmed the forgery. Everything here," she tapped the file, "is already in the hands of the authorities." A knock thundered against the front doors, reverberating through the marble halls. The butler hesitated, torn between duty and dread, before opening them. Footsteps echoed sharply as two uniformed officers entered, their presence filling the space with undeniable authority. "Mr. and Mrs. Vance," one officer announced, "we have a warrant to search the premises and seize relevant financial documents." Vivian collapsed against her chair, her sobs breaking into gasps. Charles rose to his feet, but his defiance faltered as the officers stepped forward. His voice, once commanding, now cracked. "Clara, you can't do this. We're your parents." I stood slowly, my voice steady, cutting through the air like glass. "No. You stopped being parents the moment you decided my life was yours to control. Tonight, you answer for it." As the officers moved in, the empire of polished wood and glittering crystal seemed to shrink around them, every gleaming surface reflecting not wealth, but ruin. For the first time in my life, I saw them not as titans or gatekeepers, but as desperate people caught in the collapse of their own lies. And I felt no urge to save them. The Vance estate was never the same after that night. News spread faster than I imagined. Within days, whispers circulated through the elite circles my parents once ruled. By the end of the week, those whispers had hardened into headlines. "Prominent Newport family under investigation for fraud. Vance estate in jeopardy." Their empire had cracked wide open, and society devoured the spectacle. I didn't attend the hearings. I didn't need to. I let Sophia handle the legal labyrinth while I watched from a distance, detached but unflinching. The Newport estate, the very jewel they dangled like bait, was pulled into foreclosure proceedings before the probate even finalized. Creditors swarmed, seizing artwork, antique furniture, and even Vivian's prized collection of French porcelain. For years I had believed their wealth was untouchable, a fortress I could never rival. But as the truth unraveled, I saw it clearly for what it was: a house of cards, propped up by lies and greed. The fall was merciless. Charles, once respected in his business circles, was forced to resign from his remaining board positions. Vivian, who thrived on charity galas and tea parties, found doors closed to her everywhere she turned. Friends who once smiled too brightly crossed the street to avoid them. Their names, once synonymous with prestige, became a stain whispered about in low tones. And me? I felt lighter. I didn't revel in their downfall. There was no glee, no champagne celebration, just relief. Relief that the shadow I had lived under was finally gone. Relief that the weight of their expectations, their control, no longer pressed down on my chest. Still, I didn't allow myself to grow careless. Sophia urged me to shore up every defense, and I listened. Every deed, every account, every investment was secured in a fireproof safe and locked behind passwords no one else could touch. I changed the locks on my properties, updated my legal protections, and placed safeguards in place for the future. For the first time in years, my future felt like mine, untethered from guilt, untouched by their desperate hands. One evening, weeks later, I sat across from Sophia at a quiet wine bar tucked away from the noise of the city. Between us, no contracts, no files, just 2 glasses of Merlot and the hum of soft jazz in the background. She raised her glass with the faintest smile. To freedom, hard-earned. I clinked mine against hers, the sound sharp, decisive. To freedom, I echoed, the words settling deep into me like a promise. As I walked home afterward, the city lights blinked around me, alive with possibility. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't looking over my shoulder, waiting for their approval, or their sabotage. Blood ties had once defined me, chained me to a legacy I never asked for. But that night, Under the glow of street lamps and cool autumn air, I understood something with crystal clarity. Family isn't defined by control or inheritance. It's defined by respect, by choice, by love that doesn't come with strings attached. And freedom. Freedom was my truest inheritance. One I intended to guard with everything I had.